Welcome to Mythic Slumber, where ancient legends gently guide you into peaceful rest. Tonight, we drift into the timeless quest for the Holy Grail, one of the deepest mysteries of faith and wonder. Find your most comfortable position, let your breathing slow, and allow these whispered legends to carry you toward deep, restorative sleep. Our journey does not begin in the shining halls of a great castle, nor on a battlefield of clashing steel. It begins much earlier in the soft, quiet places of the world, in the deep memory of the land itself. To find the origins of the Grail, we must first drift backwards, further and further, letting the centuries fall away like autumn leaves. We travel beyond the time of kings and knights, back into an age of mist and shadow, a time when Britain was not yet a single kingdom, but a patchwork of deep forests, slumbering hills, and tribal lands steeped in an ancient and powerful magic. Imagine yourself standing on a cool, damp earth, surrounded by a fog so thick it muffles all sound. The air is heavy with the scent of moss and wet stone. This is the Britain of whispers, the land that existed before the Romans came, before great roads were carved into the landscape. It is a world governed by the cycles of the moon and the turning of the seasons. Here, the boundary between the world of mortals and the other world, the realm of spirits and the fae, is thin, as delicate as a spider's web at dawn. In this ancient world, the most potent symbols of life, power, and rebirth were not cups or chalices, but great magical cauldrons. Every tribe had its stories. Every bard had his songs of these wondrous vessels. They were not mere cooking pots, but the very heart of a chieftain's power, a source of endless sustenance and divine magic. Picture, if you will, the great hall of a Celtic chieftain, smoky and dim, lit by the flickering orange glow of a central fire. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke and roasted meat. The warriors are gathered, their faces weathered and bearded, listening as a bard plucks a simple harp, his voice a low, rhythmic chant. He sings of the Dagda, the good god of the Tuatha De Danann, the people of the goddess Danu. The Dagda, he sings, possessed a cauldron known as the Undri, from which no company ever went away hungry. It was a vessel of perfect hospitality, a promise that there would always be enough, that the community would always be cared for. It represented abundance, warmth, and the life-giving power of the earth. The bard's song paints a picture of a simple, profound magic, a magic of nourishment and togetherness. Then the bard's tune shifts, becoming more somber, more epic. He sings of a different vessel, the cauldron of Bran the Blessed, a giant king who could wade across the Irish Sea. His cauldron was even more wondrous, for it held the power of rebirth. Any slain warrior placed within it would rise again at dawn, whole and ready to fight, though he would be without the power of speech. This cauldron was a symbol of resilience, of the endless cycle of life, death, and renewal. It was a magic not of the spirit, but of the flesh, a powerful, earthy force that could cheat death itself. The song tells of how this cauldron was eventually broken, a great loss that echoed through the ages, leaving a void, a sense of something powerful that had been lost to the world. These stories, and others like them, were the lifeblood of the people. They were whispered around hearth fires on long, dark winter nights. They were chanted by druids in sacred groves of oak, their voices rising and falling with the rustling of the leaves. The idea of a magical vessel, a source of life, healing, and endless bounty, was woven into the very fabric of the land. It was a deep, foundational myth, a piece of cultural bedrock waiting for a new story to be built upon it. These cauldrons were the ancestors of the Grail, the first pagan echoes of a quest that was yet to come. They were the dream that came before the dream. As time flowed onward like a slow and steady river, the world began to change. The old magic, rooted in the earth and the cycles of nature, began to recede. It did not vanish entirely, but withdrew into the hidden places of the world, into the deep woods and the lonely hills. It retreated to a place that existed both in the world and outside of it, an island sanctuary that came to be known as Avalon. Let your mind drift to this place now. See it not with your eyes, but with your imagination. Avalon, the Isle of Apples, rises from a shimmering lake, its shores perpetually shrouded in a gentle, swirling mist. It is a place where the seasons have no meaning, where the apple trees blossom and bear fruit at the same time. The air is sweet with the scent of flowers and ripe fruit, and the only sound is the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the distant ethereal singing of the priestesses who dwell there. Avalon is a place of healing, a refuge for those who are weary or wounded. It is ruled by Morgan and her 9 sisters, wise women who know the secrets of the herbs, the stars, and the ancient magic of the land. They are the guardians of the old ways, keepers of a wisdom that the new world is beginning to forget. Here time moves differently. A day in Avalon might be a year in the world of mortals. It is a place of tranquility, of deep restorative peace, a bridge between the physical and the spiritual. It is the slumbering heart of Britain's ancient magic, a place of immense power, a promise of healing and rebirth that the land has not yet forgotten. This profound sense of sanctuary, of a peace that lies hidden just beyond the veil of the waking world, is the very essence of these old tales. If this ancient legend is bringing you peace, a gentle light helps other restless souls discover this sanctuary. Now, let us continue deeper to the new story that was carried to these ancient shores, a story that would forever merge with the whispers of the old world. Into this world of fading Celtic twilight, a new belief arrived. It came not on the wind or through a secret portal, but on foot, carried by a man old and weary from a lifetime of travel. His name was Joseph of Arimathea. Imagine his journey, a long, slow pilgrimage from the sun-scorched hills of Judea, across the deep blue of the Mediterranean, through the heart of a burgeoning Roman Empire, and finally across the grey, choppy waters of the Channel to the shores of Britain. He was a man of great faith, a wealthy disciple who had given his own tomb for the body of Christ, and he carried with him 2 things of unimaginable sanctity. In one hand he held a simple staff cut from a hawthorn tree in the Holy Land, and hidden safely within his robes he carried a small, simple cup. It was a cup made of clay or perhaps wood, humble and unadorned, but it was the most precious object in the world. It was the cup of the Last Supper, the very vessel from which Christ had served the wine, and the same cup that, according to the legend, had been used to catch his sacred blood at the crucifixion. After his long and perilous journey, Joseph and his followers finally found their way to the west of Britain, to a strange and beautiful landscape known as the Summerlands. Here, a great conical hill rose dramatically from a vast watery marshland. This was Glastonbury Tor, an ancient and sacred place, a spiritual beacon for the pagan people who had lived there for centuries. It was a place that already hummed with a quiet and mysterious power. Weary from his travels, Joseph climbed a nearby hill, which today is called Weary All Hill. He thrust his hawthorn staff into the ground, and a gentle miracle occurred. The dry, wooden staff took root in the fertile soil and immediately sprouted leaves and blossoms. This tree, the Glastonbury thorn, would bloom twice a year, once in the spring and again at Christmas, a quiet and constant reminder of the new faith that had arrived in this ancient land. But what of the cup? The sacred vessel needed a resting place, a sanctuary where it could be kept safe until the world was ready for its power. Legend tells that Joseph hid the cup in a secret place at the foot of Glastonbury Tor, in a deep, dark well fed by a natural spring. As the cup settled into the earth, the waters of the spring were forever changed. They began to run red, not with blood, but with the rust of the iron-rich soil, yet the colour was a symbol, a permanent stain of the sacred mystery now hidden within the earth. This place would become known as the Chalice Well, a place of pilgrimage and quiet contemplation. And so the two great streams of myth and belief came to rest in the same sacred landscape. In the mists of Avalon, the old Celtic magic of healing and rebirth lay sleeping. And in the earth of Glastonbury, in the waters of the Chalice Well, the new Christian mystery of redemption and grace lay hidden. The land now held two powerful secrets, two promises of profound transformation. The pagan cauldron had become the Christian chalice. The idea of earthly rebirth had transformed into the promise of spiritual salvation. The cup, the vessel, was not yet called the Holy Grail. It was simply a secret, a slumbering power waiting for a time of great need. It waited for a king to unite the land, for a fellowship of knights to be forged in the ideals of chivalry, and for a generation of heroes to be born who would be worthy of seeking it. For now, all is quiet. The mists roll over the Summerlands. The Tor stands as a silent sentinel against the grey sky. The waters of the well flow silently, holding their sacred charge. The whispers of Avalon and the echoes of an ancient journey have merged, creating the rich, fertile ground from which the greatest of all legends will soon grow. The stage is set. The history of the land has been written. And now you can rest, knowing that the story is just beginning. From the ancient slumbering landscape of Glastonbury and the misty shores of Avalon, our story now drifts forward in time like a boat upon a gentle current. The whispers of the old world fade, replaced by the clear, harmonious notes of a new era. The land of Britain is no longer a scattered collection of tribes, but a united kingdom, and at its heart stands a city that is more than a city, a castle that is more than a fortress. It is an idea made real, a dream given form in shining stone and soaring towers. This is Camelot. Picture it now, rising from the rolling green hills of Logres. It is not a grim, forbidding stronghold, but a place of light and beauty. Its walls are built of a pale, luminous stone that seems to glow in the morning sun, and from its battlements fly not banners of war, but of celebration, their bright silks of blue, gold, and crimson snapping gently in the breeze. The city that spreads from the castle's feet is one of order and prosperity. Its streets are clean and wide, its houses built of sturdy timber and clean plaster, their roofs are warm and welcoming thatch. You can hear the sounds of a kingdom at peace, the distant rhythmic tap of a blacksmith's hammer, the gentle murmur of merchants in the marketplace, the laughter of children, and from the castle itself, the faint, sweet sound of a minstrel's harp. This is the kingdom that Arthur has built, a realm carved from the chaos of the Dark Ages, a sanctuary of law and learning, a beacon of hope in a world that had for too long been shrouded in shadow. Camelot is the physical manifestation of his vision, a place where justice, honor, and beauty could flourish. At the very center of this kingdom, in the great hall of the castle, sits the man who is its heart and soul, King Arthur. He is not a king who rules from a high and distant throne, but one who presides as the first among equals. He is in the prime of his life, his face noble and kind, his eyes filled with a wisdom that seems to go beyond his years. He carries the weight of his kingdom not as a burden, but as a sacred trust. He is the king who drew the sword from the stone, the rightful heir destined to bring peace to the land. His presence fills the hall with a sense of calm authority. When he speaks, his voice is not loud, but it is heard by all, for his words carry the weight of truth and fairness. He spends his days listening to the troubles of his people, settling disputes, and dispensing a justice so even-handed it has become legendary throughout the world. He is a warrior, yes, the greatest of his age, but he is a king who values peace above all else, who fights only to protect the innocent and preserve the harmony of the world he has so carefully built. And beside him, the soul of the court is Queen Guinevere. She is a woman of breathtaking beauty and profound grace. Her presence brings a softness and a light to the martial strength of the court. She is the embodiment of all that the knights have sworn to protect: beauty, wisdom, and the gentle arts of civilization. Her laughter is like music, and her counsel is as valued by Arthur as that of any of his advisors. Together, they are the sun and moon of this perfect kingdom, the twin poles of strength and grace around which the entire world of Camelot revolves. Their court gathers in the great hall, a vast chamber with a high, vaulted ceiling of dark oak, like the upturned hull of a great ship. Sunlight streams through tall, arched windows, illuminating the rich tapestries that hang on the walls. Tapestries that tell the stories of Arthur's great victories and the founding of the kingdom. But the heart of the hall and the heart of the fellowship is the round table. It is a massive, magnificent thing, crafted by the magician Merlin from the wood of a single ancient tree. It is a perfect circle, so large that 150 knights can be seated around its polished surface. There is no head to this table and no foot. Its shape is a powerful symbol. Here, all are equal. A humble new knight has the same place and the same voice as the most famous champion. They are a single brotherhood, united in their loyalty to the king and to the ideals he has set forth. Each knight's name is carved into the back of his chair, and there is one seat known as the Siege Perilous, which remains empty. It is a place of danger, reserved by Merlin's prophecy for the knight who is destined to find the Holy Grail, a knight of such perfect purity that any other who dares to sit there will be instantly consumed. It is a constant, quiet reminder that even in this age of earthly perfection, there is a higher spiritual quest still to come. This fellowship of the Round Table is bound together by a solemn oath, a code of conduct that governs their every action. This is the code of chivalry. It is more than a set of rules, it is a way of life, a path of moral and spiritual discipline. Every knight has sworn to never do outrage or murder, and to always flee treason. They have sworn to give mercy unto him that asketh mercy, and to always give succour to ladies, damsels, and gentlewomen. They have sworn to never do battle in a wrongful quarrel for no law nor for any world's goods. It is a vow to use their incredible strength not for personal gain, but in the service of others, to be a shield for the weak, a voice for the voiceless, and a sword for justice. Among this legendary brotherhood, one knight stands as the perfect earthly embodiment of the chivalric ideal. He is Sir Lancelot du Lac, the first knight of the Round Table. He is the greatest warrior of his age. His skill with sword and lance is unmatched. His courage in the face of any danger is absolute. But his greatness lies not just in his strength, but in his character. He is noble, courteous, and unfailingly loyal. His devotion to Arthur is the bedrock of his life, and his adoration for Queen Guinevere is the fire that fuels his heroic deeds. He is the champion of the court, the knight who undertakes the most perilous quests and always returns victorious. He is the standard against which all other knights measure themselves. He is brave, he is honourable, he is merciful. He is, in all earthly matters, the perfect knight. And yet, there is a shadow of sorrow in his eyes, a hint of a deep and secret conflict within him, for his profound devotion to the Queen is a love so powerful that it will one day become both his greatest glory and his most tragic flaw, a single imperfection that will keep him from achieving the ultimate spiritual quest. The rhythm of life in Camelot is one of peace and joyful purpose. The days are filled with activity. In the cool of the morning, the tilt-yard rings with the sound of steel on steel as the knights practice their skills, their horses thundering across the packed earth in mock jousts. In the great hall, Arthur sits with his advisors, governing the kingdom with a steady hand. In the city, artisans practice their crafts, creating beautiful works of wood, metal, and cloth. It is an age of prosperity, a time when the arts of peace are allowed to flourish. The evenings are a time of celebration and fellowship. When the sun sets, the great hall is filled with light from hundreds of candles and the warmth of a roaring fire. The knights and ladies of the court gather for great feasts, the tables laden with food and wine. Minstrels and bards, the finest in all the land, play their harps and lutes, singing songs of love, of adventure, and of the heroic deeds of the Knights of the Round Table. It is a time of stories, a time of shared joy, a time when the bonds of the fellowship are strengthened. This is the golden age of Camelot, a perfect, fleeting moment of harmony. The wars have been won, the invaders have been driven back, and the land is at peace. The kingdom is strong, the king is just, and the fellowship is whole. It is a world that seems complete, a model of what the world of mortals can and should be. But this perfection is the stillness before a great wind. The knights have been tested in body, but they have not yet been truly tested in spirit. Their honour, their courage, and their faith are all about to be called upon for a quest far greater and more mysterious than any they have ever undertaken before. The kingdom is at its zenith, basking in a warm golden light, unaware that a vision is coming, a sacred mystery that will call them away from the comfort of this earthly paradise and onto a lonely spiritual path from which many will never return. The stage is perfectly set, the fellowship is at its strongest, ready for the legendary quest to begin. The golden age of Camelot continued, a long and peaceful season of justice and joyful fellowship. The days flowed one into the next, each marked by the steady rhythm of a kingdom secure in its own goodness. The great feast of Pentecost arrived, a time of high celebration throughout Christendom, marking the day the Holy Spirit descended upon the apostles. In Camelot, it was the most important feast of the year, a time when all the knights of the Round Table were required to return to court, to renew their oaths and to share the stories of their deeds. The great hall was alive with colour and sound, a perfect picture of the realm's prosperity and strength. The long tables were laden with the finest foods the kingdom could produce: roasted swan and peacock, great platters of venison and boar, silver bowls filled with fruits from the south, and endless loaves of soft white bread. The air was warm with the light of 1,000 candles and the heat from the 2 massive hearths that blazed at either end of the hall, their flames dancing and casting flickering shadows on the high-beamed ceiling. Minstrels played gentle, uplifting melodies on their harps and lutes, their music a soft counterpoint to the low, happy murmur of conversation that filled the vast space. The knights, clean from the dust of the road, were dressed in their finest tunics of silk and velvet, their faces bright with the joy of reunion. They spoke of the quests they had undertaken, of giants defeated and wrongs righted, their voices filled with the easy confidence of men who know their purpose and are secure in their brotherhood. King Arthur presided over it all, his gaze moving around the hall with a deep and paternal satisfaction. Queen Guinevere, seated beside him, smiled graciously, her presence a calming and beautiful focal point for the entire court. Everything was as it should be. The world felt solid, permanent, a perfect creation basking in a moment of pure, untroubled grace. The knights and ladies ate and drank, their hearts full, believing this perfect fellowship would last forever, a shining beacon in the history of the world. They felt themselves to be at the very centre of a story that could only have a happy ending, a celebration that was but one of many more to come. It was in this moment of perfect earthly contentment that the world suddenly changed. It began not with a sound, but with a silence. A profound stillness fell over the great hall, so sudden and so complete that it was more powerful than any noise. The music of the minstrels faltered and then ceased entirely. The conversations of the knights died on their lips. Even the crackling of the great fires seemed to be muffled, as if the very air in the room had grown thick and heavy. The knights looked at one another, their expressions a mixture of confusion and awe. The light in the hall began to shift. The warm, golden glow of the candles and the firelight seemed to dim, not as if being extinguished, but as if being overwhelmed by a different kind of light, a soft, silver radiance that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the castle. It was a light that was not of the sun or of any flame, a cool, ethereal brilliance that grew steadily, washing the colour from the banners and tapestries and bathing everything and everyone in a sublime, otherworldly glow. Then a gentle tremor ran through the castle, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to rise from the earth itself. It was not a violent shaking, but a vibration so profound it felt as though the world was holding its breath. The doors and windows of the great hall, which had been closed against the evening chill, suddenly swung open of their own accord, yet no wind entered, only the strange and beautiful silver light. As the knights sat frozen, their hands resting on the tables, a scent of impossible sweetness filled the air, a fragrance like 1,000 flowers blooming at once in a hidden meadow after a spring rain. And through the main doors a single, impossibly bright beam of light pierced the twilight of the hall, a beam that shone 7 times brighter than the sun, yet it did not hurt the eyes to look upon it. It moved slowly, majestically, into the centre of the room, and within that beam of light, floating serenely in the air, was the source of this divine spectacle. It was a vessel, a cup, but it was veiled in a cloth of pure white samite, so no one could truly see its shape or form. It was the Holy Grail. It moved through the hall without any visible means of support, gliding silently between the long tables. As it passed, a wave of profound peace washed over every person present. All feelings of anger, jealousy, or sorrow were instantly erased, replaced by a sense of blissful tranquility and a love so overwhelming it brought tears to the eyes of the strongest warriors. The knights felt their souls cleansed, their spirits elevated. They were no longer just men in a hall, they were witnesses to a divine mystery. And then a final miracle occurred. As the veiled grail hovered in the air, every knight found himself looking at the empty platters and goblets before him. And as he looked, the very food and drink that his heart most desired appeared as if from thin air. For one knight it was the simple bread and cheese of his childhood home. For another, the rich, spiced wine of a distant land. Each was served according to his own secret wishes, a personal and intimate miracle that filled not only their bodies but their souls with a perfect and complete satisfaction. For a long, timeless moment, the Grail remained, pulsing with its soft, silver light, the source of a peace that passed all understanding. Then, as silently and as mysteriously as it had arrived, it was gone. The beam of light withdrew, the sweet fragrance faded, the silver radiance receded, and the normal warm light of the candles and the fires returned. The doors and windows swung gently shut, and the profound silence was replaced once more by the soft crackling of the flames. The great hall was just as it had been moments before, yet everything was different. The knights remained motionless, their eyes wide, staring at the empty space where the vision had been. The miraculous food remained on their plates, a tangible sign that what they had seen was not a shared dream. For a long time, no one spoke. They were struck dumb with awe, their minds and hearts struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what they had just experienced. They had been in the presence of God. They had been touched by a grace so profound that the world they had known, with its tournaments and its earthly glories, now seemed pale and insignificant in comparison. The joy they had felt just moments before was a shallow thing next to the deep, resonant bliss that now filled their souls. They had been given a glimpse of heaven, and it had changed them forever. The first to break the silence was Sir Gawain, Arthur's nephew. He rose slowly to his feet, his face a mask of reverent determination. His voice, when he spoke, was low and thick with emotion, yet it carried to every corner of the silent hall. "My lords and fellows," he began, "we have been blessed this day as no knights have ever been blessed before. We have been fed by the Holy Grail itself, but it was veiled from our sight. We were not worthy to look upon it directly." He paused, and his gaze swept around the table, meeting the eyes of his brothers in arms. "Therefore, I make a vow. I will ride forth from this castle on the morrow, and I will not return for a year and a day, or for however long it takes, until I have seen the Grail more openly than it has been shown to us here. I will not rest until I have looked upon it unveiled." A murmur of assent went through the hall. Gawain's words had given voice to the longing that now consumed every knight's heart. One by one, others rose to their feet, their faces shining with a new and holy purpose. Sir Lancelot, Sir Bors, Sir Percival, and all the others, nearly every knight of the 150 present, stood and made the same solemn vow. They would forsake the comforts of Camelot, the fellowship of the court, and the glory of worldly quests. They would embark on a new quest, a spiritual pilgrimage to find the source of the grace they had so briefly touched. King Arthur, who had remained seated, watched this unfold with a heart full of both pride and a deep, inconsolable sorrow. He was proud of their piety, of their fearless devotion to God. But he was also a king, and he knew what this meant. He knew that this vow was the death knell of the Round Table. He understood that this quest was not one they could undertake together as a brotherhood. It was a test of individual spirit, a lonely path that each must walk alone. He saw that many of the noble knights who now stood before him, their faces filled with holy light, would never return to Camelot. The perfect fellowship he had built, the greatest in the history of the world, would be broken, scattered to the winds by this divine calling. The golden age was over. The great feast of Pentecost had become a last supper for the fellowship of the Round Table. A tear traced a path down the king's face as he looked upon his knights, his children, who were now bound for a journey into the mysteries of the spirit, a journey from which the world of Camelot would never fully recover. The quest had begun. The echoes of the final vow settled in the great hall, and the profound silence that had followed the Grail's departure returned, but it was a different kind of silence now. The first had been one of stunned, blissful awe. This was a silence heavy with the weight of consequence, thick with the gravity of oaths sworn before God. The miraculous food, a tangible remnant of the divine visitation, still sat upon the tables, but no one had the heart to eat. The joy of the feast had been replaced by a new, solemn purpose that left no room for earthly celebration. The knights remained standing, a forest of figures clad in silk and velvet, their faces illuminated by the candlelight, yet their expressions were no longer those of feasting warriors, but of pilgrims who had just received their calling. They were a brotherhood on the brink of dissolution, a perfect circle about to be broken into 100 lonely paths. King Arthur finally rose from his seat, and the movement, though slow and heavy, drew every eye in the hall. The tear that had traced a path down his cheek was gone, but his face was etched with a sorrow so deep it seemed to age him in that single moment. He was their king, the architect of their fellowship, and he saw with a terrible clarity what this holy calling would cost them all. When he spoke, his voice was not angry, nor was it pleading. It was the voice of a father facing a great and inevitable loss, a voice filled with a love that was inseparable from his grief. "My knights," he began, his voice a low, resonant sound that seemed to make the very timbers of the hall vibrate with sorrow. "My brothers, never has a king been blessed with a nobler fellowship than the one that stands before me now. You have made this kingdom a beacon in a dark world. You have brought justice to the oppressed and hope to the hopeless. My heart swells with pride to hear the vows you have made this day, for they are born of a true and pious spirit." He paused, his gaze moving slowly around the great round table, resting for a moment on each familiar face, on Lancelot, on Gawain, on all the men who had been the pillars of his reign. "And yet," he continued, his voice cracking with a pain he could not conceal, "my heart is also broken, for I know what this vow means. You have sworn to seek the Holy Grail, and that is a quest of the soul. It is not a quest you can undertake together as a company. You must each ride out alone into the wilderness to face the trials that God has prepared for you and you alone. You think now of the glory of the Grail, but I think of the emptiness that will be left behind. I look upon you all, the flower of chivalry, the strength and soul of this kingdom, and I know that I am seeing you together for the last time." A deep and sorrowful murmur went through the hall. The knights, caught up in the divine fire of their new purpose, had not yet fully considered the earthly cost. Arthur's words brought the truth crashing down upon them. They looked at their brothers, the men they had fought beside, laughed with and trusted with their lives, and they understood that this fellowship, the thing that had defined them, was about to end. "Many of you who now stand before me," Arthur said, his voice growing softer, almost a whisper, "will not return to sit at this table again. You will find your end in distant lands, in enchanted forests, or in the service of this holy quest. And those who do return will be changed, for no man can seek the mysteries of God and remain as he was. The joy of this court will be gone. The strength of this fellowship will be broken. You have brought me the greatest honour a king could know, and now, in this same moment, you bring me the greatest sorrow I have ever felt. For this day the round table is undone." He sat down heavily, his face in his hands, a king grieving not a lost battle, but the loss of the very thing he had created. The knights were deeply moved by their king's words. They felt the truth of his sorrow in their own hearts. Sir Lancelot, the greatest of them all, felt a sharp and terrible pang of conflict. His loyalty and love for Arthur were the foundations of his life, and to cause his king such pain was an agony. Yet the vision of the Grail had stirred something even deeper within him, a longing for a spiritual purity he knew he lacked, a desperate hope that this quest could somehow cleanse the secret sin of his love for the queen that he carried in his heart. He could not turn back from the vow. Sir Gawain, ever practical and true, felt the sorrow of parting as a physical weight, but his sense of honour was absolute. A vow made was a vow to be kept, especially one of such magnitude. He looked at his uncle, the king, and his heart ached, but his course was set. The divine calling was a command, not an invitation. The rest of the night passed in a state of quiet and sombre reflection. The feast was over. The minstrels had packed away their instruments. One by one, the knights and ladies retired, not to sleep, but to pray, to prepare their souls for the journey that lay ahead. The great hall, which had so recently been filled with life and laughter, was now empty and silent, the candles burning down in their sconces, the great round table, a dark and waiting circle, already feeling the absence of those who were about to depart. The next morning, a pale, grey light filtered through the high windows of Camelot. The usual cheerful sounds of the castle were replaced by a quiet, purposeful industry. In the armoury, squires worked in silence, polishing helmets and oiling chainmail, their movements precise and respectful. In the stables, grooms saddled the great war horses, their hands gentle as they checked every strap and buckle. This was not the boisterous preparation for a tournament or a campaign with its shouts and its boasts. This was a departure that felt more like a monastic rite, a quiet and personal dedication. The knights emerged, not in the bright silks of the feast, but in the grim, practical leather and steel of the road. They moved through the castle courtyards, their faces set with a calm and resolute gravity. There were no grand pronouncements, no public farewells. The partings were quiet, personal, and brief. A knight would clasp the hand of a brother, a shared look of understanding passing between them, a silent prayer for a safe return. They took their leave of Queen Guinevere, who stood on a balcony overlooking the main courtyard, her face pale, her eyes filled with unshed tears as she watched the fellowship she loved prepare to scatter to the winds. Then came the moment of departure. They did not ride out as a great army, with banners flying and trumpets sounding. That was the old way, the way of earthly glory. This new quest demanded a different kind of beginning. One by one, each knight mounted his horse. He would ride to the great gate of Camelot, give a final, solemn nod to the king who stood watching from the battlements, and then turn his horse's head towards the unknown. Each chose a different path. One rode east towards the rising sun. Another turned west towards the sea. A third guided his horse into the deep, ancient shadows of the great forest of Brocéliande, a place of unknown dangers and powerful enchantments. They melted away from Camelot, not as a flood, but as 100 individual streams, each seeking its own course. The great courtyard, which had been bustling with the strength of the realm, slowly emptied until only the quiet sounds of the castle remained. Arthur stood on the wall, watching until the last of his knights had disappeared from view, a lone figure silhouetted against the morning sky. The air felt colder, the world felt emptier. He turned and looked back at his great castle, at the city he had built, and it now seemed to him a beautiful, hollow shell. The soul of Camelot had just ridden out of its gates. He walked back to the great hall and stood before the round table. The chairs were all empty. The names carved into their backs seemed like memorials, a list of the lost. The siege perilous, the empty seat, had always been a symbol of a future promise. Now every seat felt perilous, a symbol of a present loss. The breaking of the fellowship was complete. The quest for the Holy Grail had begun, not with a clash of swords, but with the quiet, heart-breaking sound of 100 horses walking away in 100 different directions. The Golden Age had ended, and the Age of Legend had begun. As the last of the familiar knights of the Round Table disappeared from view, leaving Camelot in its newfound silence, the story of the quest began to unfold. It did not, however, begin with any of the famous champions who had just departed. It began with an arrival. On the very day of the feast, after the vision of the Grail had passed and the vows had been sworn, a strange and beautiful procession had made its way to the gates of Camelot. An old man, dressed in the simple white robes of a hermit, led a young man whose face was so beautiful and serene that he seemed more like an angel than a mortal. He was without armor or any of the trappings of a knight, yet he carried himself with a quiet nobility that surpassed them all. The old man led him into the great hall, where the king and the few remaining knights sat in somber reflection. He presented the youth to Arthur, declaring that he had brought the one for whom they had all been waiting, a knight of the lineage of Joseph of Arimathea, destined to bring the quest for the Holy Grail to its conclusion. The young man's name was Galahad. A hush fell over the hall as all eyes turned to him. There was an aura of profound peace about him, a stillness that seemed to quiet the very air around him. He did not speak of his own prowess or make any boast, but simply stood with a humble and graceful patience. The old man led him to the Round Table, to the one seat that had remained empty since the founding of the Fellowship, the Siege Perilous. It was the seat of danger, the place Merlin had prophesied would be the doom of any unworthy man who dared to sit in it. Yet Galahad showed no fear. Guided by the old man, he sat down in the fated chair as calmly as if it were any other. There was no flash of fire, no clap of thunder. Instead, a soft light seemed to glow from the ancient wood of the chair, and as the court watched in amazement, letters of gold began to form on the back of the seat, spelling out his name and his destiny. This is the seat of Galahad, the High Prince. The prophecy was fulfilled. The knight for whom the seat had waited had finally arrived. Shortly after this miraculous event, a new wonder appeared. A lady of the court came running into the hall, her eyes wide with excitement, bringing news of a marvel she had seen down at the river that flowed past the castle. The king and his knights followed her to the riverbank, and there they saw a sight that filled them with awe. Floating gently on the current was a great square stone of red marble, and driven deep into its centre was a magnificent sword, its hilt studded with precious stones that glittered in the sunlight. As the stone drifted closer to the bank, they could read the words that were inscribed upon it in letters of gold. "Never shall man take me hence, but only he by whose side I ought to hang, and he shall be the best knight of the world." This was a test, a clear sign from heaven. Arthur knew at once that this sword was not for him, nor for any of his established champions. He turned to Sir Lancelot, the greatest knight the world had known, and urged him to try. But Lancelot, with a heavy heart, refused. He knew in his soul that his own sins made him unworthy, that this adventure was not meant for him. Then Sir Gawain, ever bold, stepped forward to attempt the feat, but his hands could not stir the blade from the stone. One by one the other knights tried, but the sword remained held fast, as if it were part of the marble itself. Finally, Arthur looked to Galahad, who had been standing quietly, watching the proceedings with his serene and untroubled gaze. At the king's gentle urging, Galahad stepped forward. He placed his hand upon the hilt, not with a great show of strength, but with a simple, trusting touch. And without any effort at all, the sword slid free from the stone, as smoothly as if it were being drawn from a sheath of silk. He held the blade aloft, and it caught the light, a perfect and beautiful weapon. The court erupted in cheers, for they had witnessed another miracle. Galahad was not just the knight of the Siege Perilous. He was the best knight of the world, the one chosen by God for this sacred task. Galahad's journey began, and it was unlike the journey of any other knight. He was armed now with the fated sword, but he still lacked a shield. He was told by a white-robed abbess that a shield was waiting for him, one that no other man could bear without meeting with misfortune. He rode to a hermitage where he found the shield hanging behind an altar. It was a beautiful shield, as white as snow, but upon it was a cross of the deepest red. The abbess told him its story. The shield had been made in the holy city of Sarras and belonged to a king who had been converted by Joseph of Arimathea. When the king lay dying, Joseph had drawn a cross upon the shield with his own blood, declaring that it would be a shield of protection for the one who was to come, the last of his lineage, Sir Galahad. It was a shield marked not with a coat of arms representing earthly lineage or achievement, but with a symbol of pure faith and divine sacrifice. Fully equipped now with the sword of destiny and the shield of faith, Galahad rode out into the world. His path was not one of struggle and doubt, but one of serene and guided purpose. While other knights wandered through the dark and tangled forests, wrestling with their own inner demons and facing monstrous temptations, Galahad's way seemed to be cleared before him. He moved through the world as if protected by an invisible grace. The enchanted forests seemed to part for him. The dangerous beasts of the wild seemed to be tamed by his presence. He was not a warrior who sought out battles for the sake of glory. The conflicts he entered were not of his own making, but were placed in his path by divine will, tests designed not to prove his strength but to affirm his purity. He would arrive at a castle plagued by a wicked custom, and with a calm and righteous certainty he would abolish it. He would encounter a maiden beset by evil knights, and he would deliver her, not with a furious rage, but with a swift and holy justice. His every action was effortless, flowing from a place of perfect alignment with God's will. He was a figure of profound and gentle mystery. He spoke little and never of himself. He did not boast of his victories or lament his hardships. His focus was singular, directed entirely towards the spiritual goal of his quest. He was courteous and kind to all he met, yet there was a distance about him, an otherworldly quality that set him apart. He was in the world, but not of it. His companions on the road would find themselves humbled by his presence, their own worldly ambitions and petty concerns seeming foolish and small in the light of his simple, unwavering piety. He was the living embodiment of the quest itself, a soul so pure that the Grail seemed to be drawing him towards it as surely as a magnet draws iron. His journey was a demonstration of a profound truth of the Grail legend, that the quest could not be achieved through strength of arms or force of will. Worldly skill, fame, and courage were of no use in this spiritual landscape. The Grail did not reward the proud or the mighty. It revealed itself only to the humble, the chaste, the soul that had been emptied of all self-interest and filled only with the love of God. Galahad did not need to strive, he simply had to be himself. His entire life had been a preparation for this single task. He was the answer to the kingdom's prayers, the healing balm for the wounded land, the perfect vessel for a perfect grace. As he rode on, a solitary figure in white armour, carrying the Red Cross shield, he was like a moving prayer, a silent testament to the power of a life lived in complete and perfect faith. His path was straight and true, a serene and luminous line drawn through the chaotic and fallen world, leading ever onward towards the final holy mystery. While Sir Galahad moved through the world on a path of serene and effortless grace, another knight, the greatest champion the world had ever known, found his own journey to be one of profound and agonizing struggle. This was Sir Lancelot du Lac, the flower of earthly chivalry, the man whose name was synonymous with courage, honour, and martial perfection. He was Galahad's father, yet their paths to the Grail could not have been more different. Where Galahad's was a journey of divine affirmation, Lancelot's was a painful pilgrimage of self-discovery, a stripping away of worldly pride to reveal the wounded soul that lay beneath. He had ridden out from Camelot with a heart full of a complex and warring mixture of hope and sorrow. The hope was that this sacred quest might be the one great deed to finally wash away the stain of his secret sin, his all-consuming love for Queen Guinevere. The sorrow was for the pain his departure had caused his king, and for the breaking of the fellowship he so dearly loved. Yet beneath it all, there was also a quiet confidence. He was Lancelot. He had never failed in any quest, never been defeated in any tournament or battle. He believed in the deepest parts of his warrior's heart that his strength, his will, and his unwavering devotion could overcome any obstacle, even this one. He believed he could earn his way to the Grail through deeds, through penance, through the sheer force of his legendary resolve. He was about to learn that the currency of this new kingdom was not strength but humility, and it was a coin he did not yet possess. His journey began, as so many of his others had, riding through the deep and tangled forests of Logres. But this time the world seemed different, or perhaps he was seeing it through different eyes. The familiar challenges of the road, the rogue knights and distressed damsels, seemed to melt away before him, leaving him in a strange and unnerving solitude. The quest was not testing his sword arm, it was testing his spirit, and he found the silence of the forest to be a more formidable opponent than any giant or dragon. His own thoughts became his greatest trial. The memory of Guinevere was a constant presence, a beautiful and painful ghost that rode beside him. In the quiet of the long nights, he would see her face in the flickering firelight, hear her voice in the rustling of the leaves, and the longing for her was a physical ache, a deep and hollow emptiness that no prayer seemed to fill. He knew this love was the source of his unworthiness, yet the thought of renouncing it felt like a kind of death. It was the central conflict of his soul, the great and tragic flaw in the otherwise perfect diamond of his character. He was a man divided against himself, his love for God and his love for his queen locked in a battle that was tearing him apart. He came one day to a small, ancient chapel deep in the woods, where an old hermit lived a life of quiet prayer. Lancelot, weary from his travels and his inner turmoil, confessed his sins to the holy man, admitting his love for the queen. The hermit, his eyes clear and full of a gentle wisdom, listened patiently. He told Lancelot that his love, while born of a noble heart, was a barrier of pride that stood between him and God's grace. "Sir," the hermit said, his voice soft as moss, "so long as you carry this love in your heart as a treasure, you will never see the Grail. You value the love of a mortal woman more than the love of your Creator. You must choose. You cannot serve two masters." Lancelot left the chapel with a heavy heart, the hermit's words echoing in his mind. He tried to pray, to promise God he would forsake his love, but the words felt hollow on his tongue. He could not bring himself to truly let her go. His trials grew more direct, more mystical. He came to a crossroads where a stone cross stood, and as he rested, he fell into a deep and troubled sleep. In his dream he saw two great white horses, but one had a dark stain upon its flank. He knew with the certainty of dreams that they represented Galahad and himself. He saw himself attempt to approach a great feast, but a voice like thunder warned him away, telling him he was not welcome at the table of the Lord. He awoke in a cold sweat, the feeling of rejection, a sharp and bitter pain. He rode on and came to a chapel where he saw a sick knight being healed by the mere presence of the Holy Grail, which was carried into the room by an unseen hand. Lancelot, desperate to get closer, tried to enter the chapel, but an invisible force held him back, as solid and as unforgiving as a stone wall. He pushed against it with all his legendary strength, but it was useless. A fiery breath seemed to wash over him, and he fell to the ground, struck down not by a physical blow, but by the sheer, overwhelming power of the sanctity he was unworthy to approach. He lay there as if dead, his body paralyzed, his mind trapped in a long and terrible vision. For 24 days he lay in this state, caught between waking and sleeping, his soul tormented by images of his own sinfulness and the unattainable beauty of the Grail. When he finally awoke, he was a changed man. The pride was gone, shattered by the raw and undeniable power of his own rejection. He was no longer Lancelot the champion, but Lancelot the sinner, a man who had come face to face with his own spiritual poverty. Stripped of his certainty, he wandered on, his journey becoming a true penance. He discarded his fine armour and wore a simple hair shirt beneath his robes. He fasted and prayed, his heart broken and humbled. In this state of profound despair, he was found by the keepers of a holy man who took him aboard a mystical ship, the same ship that was destined to carry the Grail Knights on their final journey. Here he was granted a small measure of grace. He was reunited with his son, Galahad, and for a time they travelled together. In the presence of his son's effortless purity, Lancelot felt his own flaws all the more keenly, yet it was not a bitter jealousy he felt, but a deep and sorrowful love. He saw in Galahad the man he could have been, the man he had failed to be. After they parted, Lancelot's final and most profound trial awaited him. He was led by a divine guidance to the shores of the sea, where he came to a great castle, Corbenic, the castle of the Fisher King, the place where the Grail was kept. He was allowed to approach the gates, but no further. He knelt outside, his heart pounding, knowing that the sacred mystery was just beyond the walls. As night fell, he saw a great light emanate from the castle, and he heard the sounds of a celestial choir. He crept closer and found a small door that had been left open. Peering inside, he saw a chamber filled with a light so brilliant it was almost blinding. In the centre of the room, on a table of silver, stood the Holy Grail, unveiled and pulsing with a divine and terrible power. Overcome with a desperate longing, Lancelot forgot the warnings, forgot his own unworthiness, and tried to enter the room. "Lord," he cried, "let me see what I have sought for so long." As he stepped across the threshold, a fiery wind erupted from the Grail, a blast of pure divine energy that struck him in the chest and threw him back, unconscious and near death. He had come as close as any sinful man could, and he had been utterly rejected. He was found the next morning and cared for by the people of the castle. He slowly recovered his strength, but his spirit was forever marked by the experience. He had looked upon the face of God's mystery, and it had broken him. He knew now with a final and crushing certainty that he would never achieve the quest. His journey was over. He had failed. Yet in that failure lay a strange and difficult kind of victory. The pride was burned away. The arrogance was gone. He had been humbled to the very dust, and in that humility he found a new beginning. He returned to Camelot not as a triumphant hero, but as a quiet and penitent man, his heart at last at peace with his own limitations. He had sought the Grail and been found wanting, but in the process he had finally found himself. Among the 150 knights who rode out from Camelot, each on his own lonely path, there was one whose journey offers a different kind of lesson. He was not a celestial being of impossible purity like Galahad, nor was he a titan of earthly chivalry, wrestling with a tragic flaw like Lancelot. He was Sir Bors de Ganis, a good and honest man, a loyal cousin to Lancelot, and a knight whose greatest strength was not his skill with a sword, but the simple, unshakable steadfastness of his heart. His was a path of difficult choices, a journey that tested the very fabric of his character, proving that the way to the Grail was sometimes found not in grand miracles, but in the quiet, agonizing decisions made by a decent man trying to do the right thing in a world of shadows. Sir Bors was a husband and a father, a man with deep roots in the world, and his quest was a constant struggle between the duties of the heart and the duties of the soul. He rode out with a heavy spirit, his mind on the family he had left behind, and he prayed not for glory, but for the strength to be true to the vow he had made. His piety was not effortless, it was a choice he had to make again and again every single day. His trials began subtly, tests of his commitment to the new, spiritual life his quest demanded. He came to a great abbey where he was welcomed and given shelter. He took communion and prayed, and in a dream he was shown a vision of a great, withered tree and a beautiful white lily, symbols of the decay of earthly chivalry and the purity of the new spiritual knighthood represented by Galahad. He was told that to succeed, he must embrace a life of absolute chastity and simplicity, eating only bread and water and wearing a rough garment of penance. Bors, without hesitation, accepted these terms. He understood that this quest required him to strip away the comforts of his former life, to become a simpler, more focused vessel for God's will. He was not a man of grand passions like his cousin Lancelot. He was a man of quiet discipline, and he embraced this new austerity with a steady resolve. But the true test of his character was yet to come, and it would be a trial so terrible it would haunt him for the rest of his days. He was riding through a dark and forbidding forest when he came to a fork in the path. And at this crossroads he was presented with a vision of pure horror, a choice designed by a cruel fate to break the heart of any good man. Down one path he saw his own brother, Sir Lionel, a fellow knight of the Round Table. Lionel was stripped naked, his hands bound to a tree, and two wicked-looking knights were beating him mercilessly with thorny branches. The blood ran down his brother's back, and his cries of pain echoed through the silent woods. Every instinct in Bors's body, every bond of blood and brotherhood screamed at him to ride to his brother's aid, to cut down these villains and save his own flesh and blood. But as he spurred his horse forward, a sound from the other path stopped him cold. Down the second path, he saw a beautiful and terrified maiden being dragged away by a single powerful knight who had thrown her across his saddle. She was screaming for help, her voice filled with a desperate terror, for she knew the knight intended to dishonour her and then cast her into the dark woods to perish. Bors was frozen, caught in a moment of impossible choice. He was one man. He could not be in two places at once. He could save his brother from pain and almost certain death, or he could save the maiden from a fate of shame and despair. His heart was a battlefield. Lionel was his brother, the companion of his youth, a man he loved with all his soul. To abandon him to his tormentors felt like the most profound betrayal imaginable. Yet his vow, the very oath of the Round Table that he had sworn before King Arthur, was clear. He must always, above all else, give succour to ladies and damsels in distress. To fail in that duty was to fail as a knight. In his agony, Sir Bors did the only thing he could. He closed his eyes and prayed. He asked God for guidance, to show him the true path, not the path his heart wanted, but the path his soul required. And in the silence of his prayer, the answer came, clear and terrible. His duty to his vow, to the protection of the innocent and the helpless, was a sacred trust that superseded even the bonds of blood. With tears streaming down his face, his heart breaking for the brother he was abandoning, he turned his horse and galloped down the path after the maiden. He rode like the wind, his grief and his righteous fury giving him speed. He caught up to the wicked knight, and with a single powerful thrust of his spear, he struck the man from his horse and sent him crashing to the ground. He dismounted and freed the maiden, who fell to her knees, weeping with gratitude. He had done his duty. He had upheld his vow, but the cost was immense. As he comforted the maiden, the sounds of his brother's torment faded from the other path, replaced by an awful, empty silence. He was sure that Lionel was dead, and that he, Sir Bors, was responsible. He had chosen his vow over his blood, and the weight of that choice settled upon him, a sorrow so profound it would be his constant companion for the rest of his quest. He had passed the test, but he did not feel victorious. He felt only the deep and aching wound of his sacrifice. His trials were not over. Having proven his commitment to his vow, he was next tested on his commitment to his faith and his purity. He was brought to a great castle ruled by a beautiful lady who welcomed him with a feast and fine words. She praised his courage and his nobility, and then she made him a terrible offer. She told him that she was deeply in love with him, and that if he would not swear to be her champion and her lover, she and her 12 gentlewomen would cast themselves from the highest tower of the castle in their despair. Bors was horrified. He was a man sworn to chastity for the duration of his quest, and his heart was already heavy with the sin of the world. Yet he was also a man sworn to protect women, and the thought of being the cause of their deaths was an unbearable burden. The lady and her companions stood upon the battlements, their voices raised in a sorrowful lament, ready to leap. It was another impossible choice: break his vow of purity, or be responsible for the deaths of 13 women. Again, Bors turned to his faith. He knew that suicide was a mortal sin and that no true lady would make such a demand. He suspected a demonic trick, a temptation sent to make him fall. He looked up at the tower, made the sign of the cross and commended their souls to God, but he refused to yield. "I will not break my vow to God," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart. "Not for all the ladies in the world." The moment he spoke the words, the illusion shattered. The beautiful castle vanished, the sorrowful ladies disappeared, and he found himself alone in the dark woods, with the sound of demonic laughter fading on the wind. He had been tested, and his steadfast faith had been his shield. Finally, having proven his loyalty to his vow and his faith, he was faced with the consequence of his first terrible choice. He was reunited with his brother Sir Lionel, who had not died, but had been saved by a miracle. Yet Lionel was not filled with gratitude. He was possessed by a demonic rage, his mind twisted with the memory of his abandonment. He saw Bors not as a brother, but as a traitor. Drawing his sword, he charged at Bors, screaming that he would have his revenge. Bors was a great warrior, the equal of his brother in a fair fight. But he could not bring himself to raise his sword against his own kin. He looked at his brother's face, contorted with a mad fury, and he saw only the boy he had grown up with. He dropped his shield, fell to his knees and bared his neck, preparing to receive the death blow. He would rather die than fight his own brother. It was an act of ultimate surrender, of absolute faith in God's will. As Lionel raised his sword for the final killing strike, a brilliant pillar of fire descended from the heavens, striking the blade from his hand and throwing him to the ground. A voice from the sky, like the sound of a great bell, spoke, warning Lionel against the sin of fratricide. The demonic spirit was driven from him, and he was restored to his right mind, weeping with shame and remorse for what he had almost done. Sir Bors had faced the ultimate test. He had been willing to sacrifice his life for the sake of love and forgiveness, and his faith had saved him. Through these terrible trials, Sir Bors, the steadfast, the loyal, the good but imperfect man, had proven himself worthy. He had shown that the path to the Grail was not just for saints, but for sinners who, when faced with an impossible choice, listen not to their own hearts, but to the quiet, demanding voice of their own soul. Now our story turns to another knight, one whose path to the Grail was marked not by divine perfection or by tragic sin, but by a simple and profound innocence. This was Sir Percival of Wales, a youth who had been raised far from the splendours and complexities of Camelot in the deep and lonely forests, by a mother who had sought to protect him from the violent world of chivalry that had claimed the lives of his father and brothers. He grew up knowing only the woods, the streams and the sky. He was strong and handsome, a natural hunter, but his mind was like a clean slate, untouched by the codes of honour, the subtleties of courtly life, or even the basic tenets of faith. He was a child of nature, and when he first saw a group of knights in their shining armour, he thought they were angels from heaven. It was this pure, uncorrupted heart that made him a candidate for the Grail Quest. But it was his profound naivete that would become his greatest trial, a stumbling block that would lead him to the very threshold of success, only to see it slip through his fingers. His journey was one of learning, of moving from an untested innocence to a hard-won wisdom, a long and often painful education of the soul. When Percival finally came to Camelot, he was a strange and awkward figure. He was dressed in the rough homespun clothes of a woodsman, and his speech was blunt and artless. He did not understand the polite customs of the court, and his direct, often childlike questions brought smiles to the faces of the more sophisticated knights and ladies. Yet Arthur saw something special in him, a core of goodness and a natural strength that could not be denied. He was knighted and took his seat at the round table, eager to learn the ways of chivalry and to prove himself worthy of the fellowship. He learned to joust and to handle a sword, and he quickly showed a remarkable aptitude for the arts of combat. But it was the code of honour that he struggled with. He took every rule literally, every piece of advice as an unbreakable command. One of his early tutors, seeing his tendency to ask endless questions, had told him, "A wise knight does not speak too much, lest he be thought a fool or a gossip." Percival took this simple piece of advice and held it in his heart as a sacred law, a rule that would have devastating consequences. When the vision of the Grail appeared and the vows were sworn, Percival took the oath with a heart full of a simple and uncomplicated devotion. He did not understand the deep theological mysteries of the vessel, but he had seen its beauty and felt its peace, and he rode out from Camelot with a pure and eager spirit, ready for whatever adventure God would send him. His journey led him through many strange and wild lands. He was tested by temptations, by wicked knights and damsels who sought to lead him astray, but his simple goodness was a shield. He did not understand their subtle tricks or their clever words, and so they had no power over him. He moved through the world with a kind of holy ignorance, his heart fixed on his quest. After a long time of wandering, he came one evening to a dark and misty valley. He was lost, weary, and in despair when he saw a boat on a small lake. In the boat were two men, one of whom was fishing. Percival called out, asking if there was a place nearby where he could find shelter for the night. The fisherman, a man with a sad and noble face, told him to ride up the valley, and he would find a great castle where he would be welcomed. Percival did as he was told, and as he rode a magnificent castle, Corbinic seemed to materialize out of the swirling mists before him, its towers reaching up into the twilight sky. He was welcomed at the gate and led into a great hall where a huge fire blazed in the hearth. There, reclining on a couch, was the fisherman he had seen on the lake. He was a king, but he was lame, unable to walk, and his face was etched with a deep and constant pain. This was the Fisher King, the wounded guardian of the Grail. He greeted Percival with a gentle courtesy and invited him to sit and dine. As they sat at the table, a strange and solemn procession began, a ritual that unfolded in a profound and reverent silence. First, a youth entered the hall carrying a long white lance, and from the tip of this lance a single drop of red blood fell, yet the youth said nothing. Percival watched, his eyes wide with wonder, but he remembered his tutor's advice not to ask too many questions, and so he held his tongue. Next, two more youths entered, carrying tall, gleaming candelabras of pure gold, their flames casting a warm and holy light throughout the hall. Again, Percival was filled with a desire to know the meaning of this, but he remained silent. Finally, a beautiful maiden entered, and in her hands she carried the source of all the light and wonder in the room, the Holy Grail. It was not veiled as it had been in Camelot. It was a cup of shining gold, studded with precious gems, and it glowed with a light so brilliant and so pure that all the other lights in the hall seemed dim in comparison. As the maiden passed before the table, Percival felt the same overwhelming peace he had felt at Pentecost, a sense of grace that washed over his soul and filled him with a wordless joy. The Grail was placed upon the table, and just as before, it miraculously provided the most wonderful food and drink for the entire company. Percival was stunned, his heart filled with a holy awe. He was in the presence of the greatest mystery in all of Christendom. He knew, with a certainty that resonated in the very marrow of his bones, that he should ask about what he was seeing. A question burned on his lips. Whom does the Grail serve? Another formed in his mind. My king, what ails thee, and how can you be healed? The questions were the key. They were the purpose of his being there. But the memory of his tutor's simple, worldly advice was stronger. He thought it would be rude, impertinent to question his host about such sacred matters. He was a guest in this strange and holy house, and he did not want to appear foolish or intrusive. And so, in a moment of tragic, misguided courtesy, he remained silent. The feast ended, and Percival was led to a comfortable chamber to rest. He fell into a deep sleep, his dreams filled with the images of the lance, the candles, and the glowing cup. But when he awoke the next morning, the world had changed. The castle was utterly silent. The fire in his hearth was cold ash. He called out, but there was no answer. He dressed and walked through the empty halls, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. The great hall was deserted, the tables cleared, with no sign of the feast or the procession from the night before. He went out into the courtyard to find his horse, which had been saddled and was waiting for him patiently. As he mounted and rode towards the gate, the great drawbridge, which had been down, began to rise of its own accord, as if to seal him out forever. He spurred his horse and just managed to cross before it closed with a deafening crash. As he sat on his horse, looking back at the silent, forbidding castle, a sorrowful voice called out to him from the battlements. It was a damsel, her face streaked with tears. "Oh, you unfortunate knight!" she cried. "You, Percival the wretched! You had the chance to heal the king, to restore the land, and to achieve the greatest glory a man could know, and you failed. You saw the sacred mysteries, and you did not ask. Because of your silence, the king will continue to suffer. His land will remain a barren wasteland, and many sorrows will befall this kingdom. Go now, for you are not welcome here." The voice faded, and Percival was left alone in the misty valley, the weight of his failure crashing down upon him with a force that almost drove him from his saddle. He had been at the very heart of the mystery, and he had failed. His innocence, which had been his shield, had now become his curse. What followed was a long and desolate period of wandering. Percival was cast out from the path of the quest and into a spiritual wilderness. He was consumed by shame and despair. He felt that God had abandoned him, and in his grief he began to abandon God. For 5 years he wandered through the world, a ghost of the knight he had once been. He no longer attended Mass, no longer prayed. He forgot his vow, forgot his purpose, and rode simply for the sake of riding, engaging in meaningless tournaments and worldly adventures to distract himself from the hollow ache in his soul. This long and lonely wandering is a part of many great legends, a time for the hero to be tested and to grow. As we follow Percival through his years of trial, it brings to mind the many other stories and myths that have shaped our world. If there is a particular legend or a historical tale you would like to journey through in a future story, feel free to leave a gentle comment below. Your suggestions often guide our next adventure into the land of dreams. Now, let us return to Sir Percival, lost in the deep and unforgiving wilderness. He was a man adrift, his simple faith shattered by his great failure. He had to learn a new kind of faith, one that was not based on the blind following of rules, but on a deeper understanding of compassion and wisdom. He was finally found on a Good Friday by a procession of penitents who were shocked to see a knight riding in full armour on such a holy day. They guided him to a hermit, a wise and holy man who listened to Percival's story of failure and despair. The hermit gently explained to him the meaning of his trial. "My son," he said, "your failure was not born of wickedness, but of a lack of wisdom. You followed the letter of a man's advice, but you ignored the calling of your own heart. The question was not one of curiosity, but of compassion. To ask of the king's suffering would have been an act of love, and it is love that unlocks the grace of the Grail." Through the hermit's counsel, Percival began the slow and difficult process of finding his way back. He repented his years of despair, and his faith was rekindled, no longer the simple, untested faith of his youth, but a deep, resilient faith that had been forged in the fires of failure and sorrow. He had learned his lesson. He was no longer just the innocent knight. He was becoming the wise knight, and his journey towards the Grail could now truly begin again. As the Knights of the Round Table journeyed on, their individual paths of trial and revelation began to converge upon a single sorrowful truth. Their quest was not merely a personal pilgrimage for the salvation of their own souls. They were part of a much larger story, a drama in which the fate of the entire world seemed to hang in the balance. The visions, the tests, the strange and holy encounters, all of these were leading them deeper into the heart of a great and terrible sickness. This sickness was not just in the hearts of men, but in the very land itself. As they travelled, they began to notice a change in the world around them. The lush green forests of Logres grew thinner, the trees more gnarled and spectral. The vibrant, rolling hills gave way to a landscape that was flat, grey and weary. They had entered a cursed and blighted kingdom, a place known in whispers and in sorrowful songs as the Wasteland. This was the domain of the Fisher King, and the story of this land is the story of a wound so deep and so grievous that its pain had poisoned the very earth, the water and the sky. Imagine this landscape now as you drift deeper into the story. Let the vibrant colours of Camelot fade from your mind and replace them with a palette of muted greys and sombre browns. The earth here is cracked and dry, a web of fissures spreading across barren fields where nothing grows. The soil is the colour of ash, and when the wind blows, it does not carry the scent of grass and flowers, but only a fine, gritty dust that stings the eyes and coats the tongue. The trees are skeletal, their leafless branches reaching up to the sky like the gnarled hands of old men begging for a rain that never comes. There are no birds singing in these branches, only the occasional mournful croak of a crow, a black shape against a sky that is perpetually overcast, a ceiling of low, oppressive cloud that smothers the light of the sun. The rivers and streams that flow through this land are not clear and swift, but sluggish and dark, their waters choked with a sickly green algae. They move without a sound, their surfaces as still and as lifeless as glass. The very air here is heavy, thick with a sense of profound and ancient sorrow. To breathe it is to feel a weariness seep into your bones, a quiet despair that drains the will and dulls the spirit. The castles and towns of the wasteland are crumbling into ruin. Their stones are dark with a damp that never dries, and their walls are slowly surrendering to the grip of ivy and the patient work of decay. The people who live here move with a slow, listless shuffle. Their faces are pale and drawn, their eyes empty of hope. They do not laugh or sing. They speak in hushed tones, as if afraid to disturb the heavy silence that blankets their world. The crops in their fields have failed, season after season. Their cattle are barren, and their children are few. They are a people living in a state of perpetual twilight, waiting for a dawn that they no longer believe will ever arrive. This is not a land that has been ravaged by war or by a sudden plague. This is a sickness of the soul, a spiritual blight that has made the world itself infertile. This is the Wasteland, a kingdom that has forgotten how to live. The source of this curse, the heart of this deep and pervasive sickness, lies with the king. For in the world of these ancient legends, the king and the land are one. His health is the health of the soil. His vitality is the vitality of the rivers. His spirit is the spirit of his people. And the king of this land, the Fisher King, is grievously wounded. The nature of his wound is a deep and sorrowful mystery. Some tales say he was struck through both thighs by a holy lance as punishment for a moment of sin. Others say his wound was received in a great and terrible battle, a dolorous stroke that not only maimed him but sent a shockwave of spiritual desolation out across his entire kingdom. It is a wound that will not heal. No physician can cure it, no poultice can soothe it. It is a constant, agonizing pain that has left him lame, unable to stand, unable to rule, able to do nothing but lie on his couch in the Grail Castle or be carried to the river to fish. The one small pleasure left to him in his endless suffering. His pain is the land's pain. His infertility is the land's infertility. His despair is the despair of his people. The kingdom is a mirror reflecting the wound of its king. And so the strange and solemn procession that Sir Percival witnessed in the Grail Castle is not a celebration. It is a ritual of hope and of sorrow, a constant, desperate prayer for a cure. The bleeding lance is a reminder of the wound itself, the source of all the suffering. The Grail, which provides its miraculous food, is a symbol of the divine grace that is still present in the world, a promise of the healing that is possible. The entire castle of Corbenic exists in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the arrival of the chosen knight, the pure and compassionate soul who can break the spell. The question that Percival failed to ask, "Whom does the Grail serve?" or "My king, what ails thee?" was not a password or a magic formula. It was the key because it was an act of pure, selfless compassion. To see the suffering of the king and to ask how he could be healed would be to connect with his pain, to share his burden, and in that moment of shared humanity, the healing power of the Grail would be unlocked. Percival's silence was not just a breach of etiquette, it was a failure of the heart, and because of it, the king continues to suffer and the land continues to die. The Wasteland is more than just a physical place on the knight's journey. It is a spiritual landscape, a physical manifestation of the inner state that the quest is designed to overcome. For each of the knights who passes through it, it reflects his own personal struggle. For Sir Lancelot, the barren fields and stagnant waters are a mirror of his own soul, a soul made infertile by a sin he cannot bring himself to renounce. He sees the suffering of the Fisher King and recognizes his own spiritual sickness, his own wound that will not heal. He is a king in his own right, the king of earthly chivalry, and his own flaw has created a wasteland within himself. For Sir Percival, the desolate landscape is a constant and agonizing reminder of his failure. The silent suffering of the people is a direct consequence of his own silence. Every leafless tree, every cracked and barren field is an accusation. He must journey through the world he failed to heal, and the weight of that responsibility is the fire that burns away his naive innocence and forges it into true wisdom. And for Sir Bors, the steadfast and compassionate, the wasteland is a call to action. It is the ultimate damsel in distress, a world in desperate need of the very qualities he embodies: loyalty, faith, and a heart that is willing to make a terrible sacrifice for the sake of a sacred duty. In its deepest sense, the wasteland is a symbol for any world or any soul that has lost its connection to the divine, to the source of life and grace. It is the state of a heart that has been wounded by sin or by sorrow and has allowed that wound to define its entire existence. It is the emptiness that comes from a life lived only for the self, without compassion, without a higher purpose. The quest for the Holy Grail, then, is the story of how that connection can be restored. The knights are not simply seeking a lost relic. They are the agents of a cosmic healing. They are the champions of life itself, questing to find the cure for a dying world. Their journey through the wasteland is the final and most important stage of their pilgrimage. They must confront the ultimate consequences of spiritual failure, not just in themselves, but in the world around them. They must understand the depth of the sickness before they can be the bearers of the cure. As they ride through this land of shadow, their own purity and faith are the only lights that shine in the oppressive gloom. They are the last hope of this sorrowful kingdom, the only chance that the rivers will flow again, that the fields will turn green, and that the king and his people will finally be healed. Their success will not just be a personal victory, it will be the rebirth of the world. After long and lonely years of wandering, after trials that tested their bodies, their hearts, and their very souls, the scattered threads of destiny at last began to draw the chosen few together. The quest, which had been for so long a solitary pilgrimage into the wilderness of the self, was now entering its final sacred stage, a shared journey into the very heart of the divine mystery. Sir Galahad, the pure knight, his path ever serene and illuminated by a celestial light. Sir Percival, his wide-eyed innocence now forged by failure into a deep and compassionate wisdom. And Sir Bors, his steadfast human heart proven true through the crucible of terrible sacrifice. These three, having been weighed in the balance of the spirit and found worthy, were led by an unseen hand towards the culmination of their journey. They were guided through the last desolate stretches of the wasteland, the grey and sorrowful land now seeming to recede behind them, and each felt a quiet, certain pull in his soul, a gentle but insistent summons that led them to the shores of the great, endless sea. There, waiting for them in a small, hidden cove sheltered by ancient, weather-beaten cliffs, was a sight of such otherworldly beauty it took their breath away. It was a ship, but a ship unlike any they had ever seen or imagined. It was fashioned from a wood as white as polished bone, and it seemed to shimmer with a faint internal light, as if it had absorbed the radiance of 1,000 moons. There were no sails to catch the wind, no oars to break the water, no sign of any crew or captain. It simply rested on the calm turquoise water, an object of perfect and silent purpose, waiting only for them. This was the ship of Solomon, a vessel of ancient and holy provenance, a mystical ark sent across the vast ocean of time to carry them to their final destination. As they stepped aboard, a profound and resonant peace settled upon them, a stillness that seemed to emanate from the very timbers of the ship. The air on the deck was still and sweet with a fragrance they could not name, and a sense of sacred history of countless ages of watchful waiting was all around them. In the centre of the deck lay a magnificent bed draped in silks of crimson and gold, and upon it a crown that seemed woven from pure light. At its foot, resting in a scabbard fashioned from the skin of a mythical serpent, was a sword of breathtaking beauty. The hilt was a marvel, crafted from the bones of 2 different beasts, one from the sea, one from the land, symbolizing a union of 2 worlds. The letters on the blade spelled out its name, the sword with the strange hangings. They understood without being told that this was a relic of immense power and significance, a final piece of the holy puzzle they were destined to solve, a symbol of the perfect balance they themselves had achieved. Without a word, without a sound, the ship began to move. It glided away from the shore and out into the vast open sea, moving with a silent, steady purpose, guided by a will that was not their own. Their voyage was a time of quiet contemplation, a final purification of the soul. The endless expanse of the water mirrored the infinite mystery they were approaching. The sun rose and set, painting the sky in colours of impossible beauty, and at night the stars seemed brighter and closer than they had ever been, great diamonds scattered on a cloth of the deepest velvet. They were leaving the world of men behind, sailing across the boundary that separates the earthly from the divine. They were no longer just knights of Camelot. They were pilgrims on the threshold of heaven, their old identities melting away in the face of the sublime. After many days, a new land rose from the horizon. It was the holy city of Sarras, a place that existed more in spirit than on the earth, the secret sanctuary where the Grail had first been brought by Joseph of Arimathea. As they drew closer, they could see its towers, not of cold stone, but of a substance that seemed like pure, solidified light, shimmering with all the colours of the dawn. The city was a place of perfect harmony, its streets filled with people whose faces shone with an inner peace, their movements slow and graceful. Here the Grail had been kept in its long exile, and here it had waited. The 3 knights were welcomed not as warriors, but as long-awaited guests, and were led to the spiritual palace, the heart of the city, and into a great, silent chapel. The air within was thick with a holiness so profound it was almost difficult to breathe, a silence that was not empty but full of a powerful, loving presence. An altar of silver stood at the far end of the room, and upon it, covered in a cloth of rich red samite, was the object of their long and arduous quest. They knelt in prayer, their hearts overflowing with a gratitude and an awe that was beyond words. They had arrived. Their journey was at its end. An old man, who seemed as ancient as the city itself, entered the chapel. This was Josephus, the son of Joseph of Arimathea, the first bishop of Christendom, kept alive through the centuries by the power of the Grail. He began the sacred liturgy, the Holy Mass, and as he prayed, a great and beautiful light began to fill the chapel, a light that seemed to be the source of all music. The moment of revelation was at hand. The old bishop turned to the altar and gently lifted the cloth from the sacred vessel. The Holy Grail was at last unveiled. The chapel was filled with a light so brilliant, so pure, so overwhelming that the three knights fell to their faces, unable to look upon it directly. It was not a light that burned, but a light that was pure love, a light that seemed to dissolve the very boundaries of the self and merge the soul with the divine. They felt a bliss so profound that all the suffering, all the trials, all the sorrows of their long quest melted away, revealed as a small and necessary price for this single perfect moment of union with God. A figure descended from the heavens, surrounded by a host of angels, and from the Grail, Christ himself appeared to them, his presence a force of unimaginable peace and compassion. He spoke to them, his voice not a sound but a feeling that resonated in their very souls, thanking them for their devotion, for their long and faithful service. He offered the sacrament to them from the Grail itself, a final holy communion that filled them with a grace beyond all mortal understanding. Then he turned to Sir Galahad, the pure knight, the one for whom this entire adventure had been ordained. "My son," he said, "you have seen what you have desired to see. Your quest is complete. It is time now to come with me." A look of sublime and perfect joy spread across Galahad's face, the look of a traveller who has finally reached his true home. He turned to his companions, his eyes shining with a light that was not of this world. "My brothers," he whispered, his voice filled with a peaceful finality, "farewell. Pray for me, as I will pray for you." He knelt before the Grail, stretched out his hands towards the holy vessel as if in greeting, and with a final gentle sigh, his soul departed from his body. The knights watched in awe as a host of angels descended, and with a sound of celestial music that filled the universe carried his spirit up into the brilliant light, into the heavens. Sir Galahad was gone. His earthly purpose was fulfilled. His companions were left in the silent chapel, their hearts filled with both a profound sorrow for their loss and an even more profound joy for his ascension. Their quest was also complete. Sir Percival, the innocent seeker who had found wisdom through his trials, knew that his journey was also at its end. The world of Camelot, with its tournaments and its earthly duties, no longer had any hold on him. He chose to remain in Sarras, the holy city, where he forsook his armour and his sword and became a hermit, living out the rest of his days in quiet prayer and contemplation, his soul forever at peace. He passed away a year later, his journey also at its end, and was laid to rest beside his spiritual brother Galahad. This left only Sir Bors, the steadfast companion, the good and decent man who had been the witness to it all. He was the sole survivor, the one destined to carry the story back to the world of men. After burying Percival, he boarded the ship of Solomon once more and began the long, solitary voyage back to the kingdom of Logres. He was no longer just a knight. He was a messenger, the keeper of a sacred memory, his heart a vessel containing the story of the Grail. When Sir Bors finally arrived back at Camelot, he found a kingdom in shadow. The great castle was still there, its towers still proud against the sky, but the light, the joy, the vibrant life that had once filled it was gone. The court was a quiet and sombre place. Many of the chairs at the round table were empty, their knights lost to the quest, their names now just a memory. Others who had returned were wounded in spirit, their worldly confidence shattered by a quest they could not achieve. The breaking of the fellowship, which Arthur had so sorrowfully predicted, had come to pass. Bors was brought before the king, and in the quiet of the great hall he told his story. He spoke of the trials, of the Wasteland, of the ship of Solomon, of the holy city of Sarras, and of the final glorious revelation of the Grail. He told of Galahad's ascension into heaven and Percival's peaceful end. Arthur and the few remaining knights listened in a reverent silence, their hearts filled with a mixture of awe and a deep, abiding sadness. The quest had been achieved. The greatest adventure of their age had reached its conclusion, but its success had cost them everything. The spiritual heart of the Round Table was gone, and with it, the magic that had held the perfect kingdom together began to fade. The golden age of Camelot was over. The story Sir Bors told was written down by the scribes of the court, so that it would never be forgotten. It became the last great legend of the Fellowship, an echo of a time when men had dared to seek not earthly glory, but a connection to heaven itself. The tale of the Holy Grail passed from a lived experience into a timeless myth, a whisper of hope, a dream of a world healed and made whole by a perfect and unattainable grace. And so the quest for the Holy Grail comes to its peaceful end. The tale of the knights and their sacred journey now fades back into the mists of legend, leaving behind an echo of peace and fulfillment. Just as Sir Bors returned to Camelot with a story of wonder, may you now return to a state of deep restorative rest, carrying the calm of this ancient story with you. The Grail has been found, the land is healed, and your own quest for slumber is complete. Thank you for joining us on this timeless journey. If these ancient whispers have soothed your spirit, help other weary souls discover this place of peace by subscribing and activating the notification bell. Your support ensures more legends can unfold here each week. Until the next story calls to you, may your slumber be deep and your dreams touched by wonder. Sleep well, cradled by the stories of ages past.